Have you ever thought about what really happens when you decide to stop having sex? I'm not just talking about your body, the physical changes, but also about your mind, your energy, what happens inside you, where almost no one pays attention. The truth is that when you decide to stop having sex for a while, a lot of things start to change, and not always in the way we imagine. Carl Jung, one of the most important figures in 20th century psychology, believed that sexual energy went far beyond what we usually imagine. He used the term libido, but with a deeper meaning. For Jung, libido wasn't just sexual desire, it was a life force. It was like the fuel of the soul, an energy that animates everything within us, our thoughts, our dreams, our decisions, and even the crises we experience. Now, think with me. If this energy is so powerful, what happens when we don't express it sexually? Does it disappear? Does it accumulate? Or does it change form and begin to affect other aspects of our lives? This is where a silent journey begins. When you stop having sex, this energy begins to awaken within you, and everyone experiences it differently. For some, this can feel like restlessness, anxiety, or even frustration. For others, it's a surge of creativity, a desire to do new things, to turn inward, to transform their lives. There's no single answer, but there is movement, there is change. And that's what we're going to talk about here. It's not about judging or idealizing abstinence, but about understanding, observing what happens to our psyche, to that invisible part of ourselves when sexual desire stops being felt automatically and begins to transform. Perhaps you've already experienced it. Perhaps you're experiencing it now. Or perhaps you don't even realize it has anything to do with how you've been feeling lately. But one thing is certain, breaking a habit so closely tied to your identity, so closely tied to pleasure, your body and your relationships, inevitably allows you to access deeper layers of your being. And according to Jung, this can be a tremendous opportunity. Let's now look at what he calls sublimation, and how this process can radically transform the way you manage your desires, your energy, and even the meaning of your life. But first, like this content so it reaches more people. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching it. I love knowing how many people this message is reaching and who it's reaching. So what happens to all that energy when you stop releasing it through sex? Carl Jung believed that this energy doesn't disappear or evaporate, but transforms. And this is where a very powerful concept in Jung psychology emerges: sublimation. Sublimation is about taking an instinctive impulse, like sexual desire, and elevating it to another level. It's about transforming something raw and primitive into something more refined and conscious. It's as if the energy that previously directly irrigated your body is now fueling other aspects of your life. Want a simple example? Think of an artist, a writer, an inventor. Often, behind a work of genius lies an intense energy that could easily be harnessed sexually, but it is channeled into creating something new, beyond immediate pleasure. This doesn't mean these people have stopped experiencing desire. Rather, they have simply learned to channel this energy, to use it as creative fuel, as an engine of personal growth. And this is where abstinence lived consciously can become transformative, not as a punishment or a forced effort at control, but as a choice of reorientation. You begin to realize that the desire that once drove you to seek bodily pleasure can now be used to create, study, work, carry out projects, and even deepen your identity. But it's not easy, is it? This process requires attention and courage, because when you stop seeking relief in immediate pleasure, you face what you really carry inside, the emotions you may have repressed, the emptiness you once filled with sex, companionship, and distractions. Jung spoke a lot about this. He said that human beings have a natural tendency to flee discomfort, to avoid confrontation with the unconscious, but that it is precisely in this confrontation that growth is born. Sublimation is like a path to maturity, to overcome the automatic response, the one that only seeks immediate pleasure, and access a deeper mode of existence, where we begin to understand that we can use our impulses as a constructive force. Of course, at first, the body feels it, the mind resists. We feel agitated, confused. It's as if something is being taken away from us, but in reality, something is being released. This energy, once channeled unconsciously, can now be transformed into art, study, spirituality, concentration, discipline. It can become anything you desire. It's there alive, waiting for you to give it a new direction, and little by little you begin to feel something different, a stronger presence within you, a sense of power, as if you were regaining control of your life, your habits, your attention. But it's also at that moment that something unexpected happens. You begin to discover parts of yourself that were hidden, forgotten, ignored. When we stop having sex, especially if it was part of our routine, it's as if an inner space opens up, a silence, an emptiness that can be terrifying at first. We're so used to filling this space with pleasure, distraction, and stimulation that when it disappears, everything that was hidden resurfaces. And this is where one of Carl Jung's most profound ideas emerges, the shadow. For him, the shadow is everything we refuse to see in ourselves. These are the feelings, thoughts, and impulses we have learned to hide, deny, and repress because society condemns them. Our families don't accept them, or we are ashamed of them. But denying a part of yourself doesn't mean it disappears. It's still there, operating behind the scenes, influencing your decisions, sabotaging your relationships, and pushing you to repeat behaviors you don't understand. And sex is often used as a screen, a way to avoid this encounter with the invisible. When we stop seeking this kind of relief, even subconsciously, it's as if the shadow seizes the opportunity to appear. It rises, speaks, and reveals everything we've been trying to hide. Sadness, anger, a sense of emptiness, disconnection, even that persistent thought can arise. Who am I without it? But rest assured, it's not a sign that something is wrong. On the contrary, it's a sign that you're beginning to see the real you. Jung said that facing the shadow is one of the most important steps in the individuation process, which is essentially the path to the person you really are, without masks, without escape, without autopilot. And this confrontation isn't just about evil, as many believe. Lurking in the shadows are talents you've ignored, potential you've repressed, and courage you haven't dared to show because hiding the unacceptable also ends up hiding the authentic. So by stopping having sex or using it as an escape and starting to observe what emerges, you're taking a big step towards self-discovery. You begin to feel more, to think more, to perceive yourself more deeply. And it's not always pleasant, of course, but it's in this discomfort that you find the opportunity for true transformation. For by facing your shadow, you cease to be its slave. You stop reacting automatically and begin to make more conscious decisions, with more presence and truth. And by illuminating these forgotten parts, something new begins to emerge. A deeper connection with your essence, with what Jung called the self. Once the dust of the shadows settles, after facing all that was hidden, denied and repressed, something even deeper emerges, a kind of reunion, a silent presence you may have never felt so clearly. Jung called it the self, but don't confuse it with the self we know. The social media self, the self we show to others, the self that reacts impulsively or repeats patterns to fit in. That's the ego. It's important, of course, but it's only part of the story. For Jung, the self is the center of the psyche. It's the totality of who you are. It's that part of you that already knows who you are, even if you don't yet. It carries within it your essence, your potential, your inner wisdom. It's always there, waiting for you to silence the external noise so you can hear it. And do you know what happens when you stop having sex for a while? Especially when it's accompanied by a quest for greater awareness. You begin to distance yourself from external distractions, to listen more to what's coming from within, and in the process, something begins to change within. You perception, you stop identifying with your impulses, your immediate desires, and you begin to realize that something greater is watching you. It's as if you stop living on the surface and begin to dive deeper. And in this immersion, your true self is gradually revealed between the lines, in the small signs. Sometimes it appears in a dream, sometimes in an intense intuition, in a moment of silence, of presence, of sudden lucidity. You begin to realize that everything you want is not necessarily what you need, that all your desires are not necessarily granted, and that deep down, an intelligence within you is trying to guide you, but you have to give it space. This encounter with yourself is a turning point. We move from a reactive mode to a state of heightened listening and sensitivity. And curiously, This sensitivity doesn't weaken us, but strengthens us, because we begin to live with more intention, more meaning, and more connection to what really matters. At this point, abstinence ceases to be a simple behavioral choice. It becomes a path of transformation, a gateway to something deeper, and then everything begins to change. Your relationships with others, your work, your free time, and even your own thoughts. But this shift also brings new challenges, because upon awakening to this level of consciousness, energy begins to reorganize. Then come other effects, both physical and mental, that many feel without understanding. Many report a sense of clarity, focus, and a desire to produce, create, and accomplish things that previously seemed distant. As you gradually disconnect from immediate pleasure, from automatic sexual desire, something interesting begins to happen. Your mind clears, and I'm not exaggerating. Many people who go through periods of conscious abstinence notice this. A kind of lucidity, a sharper perception, as if your ideas are beginning to organize themselves. Thinking becomes clearer, more objective. And why? Because the energy previously spent satisfying a constant and often unconscious desire begins to flow differently. Remember what Jung said about libido as a life force. It's not just about sex, it's about everything that drives you internally. When this energy is no longer used solely to satisfy the body, it begins to nourish the mind. Then a sense of alertness appears, a desire to learn, to create, to seek answers. Numerous reports confirm this. People who do not have sex for a while feel more centered, more focused, and clearer about what they want to do. And it's not magic, it's just redirected energy. But there's one important detail here. This clarity isn't immediate. It usually appears after a period of turbulence. At first, your body feels strange. Your mind tries to pull you back into your old ways. Anxiety, restlessness, even a certain irritation appear. But if you persist, if you endure this emotional detox, you will quickly notice a change. It's as if your energy is reorganized and taken in a new direction. Some begin to write, paint, compose, or study. Others decide to put into practice that old idea they had always put off. Some feel a sudden need to exercise, to take care of their body, their home, their life. It's as if the sexual drive, instead of being denied, is transformed into a force of expression. For Jung, this was the very essence of sublimation, using desire as an engine for growth. Now imagine this in practice. If you previously spent your energy in the constant pursuit of pleasure, you now have that same energy to pursue projects, change your habits, and seek a deeper and more interesting purpose. This process doesn't distance you from sex, but brings you closer to it in a more conscious and more... It's true, because when your mind is clearer, more focused, you stop seeing sex as an escape and start experiencing it as an experience of connection with others and with yourself. But this creative awakening also has another important consequence. You begin to see yourself as more autonomous, realizing that you don't need immediate pleasure to feel alive. And it radically transforms your relationship with the world and with others. This is a topic that deserves special attention. How abstinence changes your view of relationships and affection. One of the most profound changes that can occur when you stop having sex, especially if you do it consciously, is in how you perceive relationships. This doesn't mean you stop feeling attracted to someone or desiring their company, but the way you experience that attraction changes completely. Do you know why? Because little by little, desire ceases to be purely physical. It gains depth. It merges with awareness, sensitivity, and presence. You begin to realize that many of the connections you had in the past may have been driven more by need, by the habit of filling a void, than by genuine connection. And this can be shocking, even painful, because in hindsight, you realize how often you've engaged with someone simply to avoid feeling alone, to relieve tension, discomfort, loneliness, and then you begin to understand it wasn't love, it was just anesthesia. Jung said that the more unconscious a relationship is, the more it tends to be projective. In other words, we don't see the other as they are. We see what we want to see. We unload our idealizations, our frustrations, our fears, and our repressed desires onto the other. And when sex enters this unconscious game, it becomes another game, a stage where we express everything we refuse to face internally. But when we decide to step back, even for a moment, we begin to see things more clearly, and realize that relationships can be experienced with more authenticity and fulfillment. We begin to desire the other's body less and their presence more. We value conversation, shared silence, and small gestures, and at the same time, we stop tolerating superficial relationships that exist only in pleasure. It's as if abstinence frees the emotional field, making everything clearer, more honest. It can even push some people away, but it also brings others closer. Those who are on the same wavelength, searching for authenticity. And the funny thing is that often during this process, we realize that we no longer need a relationship as much, not because of coldness, but because the connection we were looking for externally begins to blossom within us. You feel more whole, more stable, more at peace with yourself. And this emotional autonomy transforms everything, even when you reconnect, because you will no longer be involved to fulfill yourself, but to contribute, to grow together, to share. Carl Jung said that the true encounter between two souls only occurs when each has found the other. Abstinence may be a way to create that inner space where this true encounter can take place. But this path, like any inner journey, can generate resistance, and one of these is self-image, what we believe ourselves to be, which begins to change as we break with old patterns. And that's what we're going to talk about now. There comes a point in this process when a question begins to resonate within you. Who am I without this desire that guided me? Stopping having sex or removing yourself from the constant stimulation of sex doesn't just mean losing a habit. You begin to lose part of the image you had of yourself. This can be disturbing because many people build their identity around their sexuality. I'm desirable, intense, free, a slut. I'm romantic. I'm attractive. Sexuality becomes a kind of label, a role, and often that role ends up being confused with who you really are. So when that part disappears, even for a while, silence sets in, and with it, confusion. If I'm no longer that, who am I now? Carl Jung talked about this a lot. The process of individuation, which is the quest to become who you really are, begins precisely when the masks start to fall, and you see it can be uncomfortable. You'll discover aspects of yourself you might not have known existed. You'll discover that much of your actions were aimed at feeling accepted, valued and validated by others, and sometimes even by yourself. It's as if desire is armor, something you put on to protect yourself from deepest pain, insecurity, fear of rejection, and feelings of inadequacy. But when that armor falls away, what's left? We find ourselves without filters, without action, without the need to prove anything to anyone. And then a new self-image emerges, more honest, simpler, more authentic. We begin to see ourselves differently, not as someone who needs to conquer to feel important, but as someone who is already important simply because they are whole. And the beauty of it all is that this new sense of self doesn't come from the mind. It comes from experience, from listening to yourself, from accepting yourself, even the parts you previously tried to hide. It's a slow, often solitary, but profoundly liberating process. And at this point in the journey, sex, when it returns, does so differently, purer, more conscious, more connected to your essence. But before that, it is absolutely necessary to integrate everything that has been learned during this process, because there is no point in embarking on this path and returning to one's old patterns without bringing anything new. After going through this whole process of abstinence, reflection, confrontation with the shadow, rediscovery of creativity and transformation of self-image, a natural question arises. So do I make love again now? How will it be? The answer is not to be found in any manual. There are no rules, no goal. What exists is a state. Internal, a new way of connecting with one's own desire. Jung affirmed that the process of individuation, of psychological maturation, is not aimed at achieving perfection or purity, but at integrating, illuminating the shadow, bringing consciousness to the unconscious, and living with greater sincerity. Therefore, sexuality must not be denied. It must be reinvented within oneself. The big transformation here isn't about stopping sex, but about stopping using it as an escape. It's about understanding that we're only looking for someone to avoid loneliness. It's about knowing how to distinguish genuine desire from automatic desire. It's about knowing how to say no when we feel it's disconnecting us from ourselves, and also knowing how to say yes with abandon and Presence when you feel a true encounter. When you relive your sexuality after this process of awareness, everything changes. Touch changes, intention changes, the way of looking, listening, and communicating changes because you no longer seek fulfillment in the other. You have already found yourself within yourself. And then sex ceases to be an end and becomes a means, a way to express love, presence, truth, a way to be complete with the other. Not to fill a void, but to overflow what already exists within you. This is integration. It is when everything you have discovered in silence, self-control, abstinence, begins to be experienced also in pleasure, contact, exchange. And see how curious it is. At this point, even desire takes on a new flavor. It no longer dominates you. It no longer blinds you. It serves you. It serves your awareness, your growth, your truth. You are no longer a slave to your own will. You have learned to look at it with clarity, calm and maturity, and that in itself is already a big step on the path of the soul. Carl Jung was not against pleasure. On the contrary, he believed that the energy of desire is one of the most powerful forces in the human psyche. But he also said that, if not consciously addressed, this force can become a prison. Now, with everything you have experienced during this process, it can become freedom. The freedom to choose, to feel deeply, to live with purpose, and above all, to connect with oneself and others, not through absence but through presence. And perhaps in the end, this is the greatest gift, discovering that true intimacy begins within,